Hey guys, it's Maymay and welcome to our very first video in our 2016 Hide His Word in My Heart biblical journaling and art journaling journey. We did this last year. We did 52 weeks of scripture where we took a scripture and we art journaled that scripture, and we did that for an entire year. And this year we're going to do things slightly different. Now today I'm going to go ahead and do my very first page for you guys. Now if you're not familiar with this series, I encourage you to check the video linked below in the description, which is Getting Started in Hide His Word in My Heart for 2016, because in that I'm going to walk you through the setup, what kind of book I'm using, what kind of pens, what kind of ideas I have. But for this one, we're just actually going to do my first week of scripture. And I'm going to skip this first page because I'm going to use the insides, because I'll be using 2 sheets, which you'll see that in the description video that I do for you. Now the way I do this is going to be different from time to time. Sometimes I will give you multiple verses and sometimes I will give you single verses. Today we're going to do a single verse. Now I'm going to take this little small ruler that I have and I'm going to split this page in half on this side. This is just my plan for how I want to do my journaling this year. You guys can take this idea and run with it and then share with us on the Facebook group how you lay out your scripture art journal. Alright, so I'm going to separate this page. At the top of the page, I'm going to focus on the hearing part. So I'm going to write H in capital letters and then hearing. So that's this section. And at this section, I'm going to focus on the experience part. So this year we'll be doing our art journals a little bit different, as you will have seen in the How to Get Started video. So the hearing portion will be in the top section of the left-hand side of my journal, and the experience portion will be in the bottom left section of my journal. The right-hand section is going to be for art. So this whole section will be all about this scripture. Now sometimes we'll focus on one scripture, sometimes we'll focus on multiple scriptures. For this week, our first week of getting started in 2016, this verse really spoke to me. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. If you're like me, you've done a lot of work over the holidays and you've been busy doing so many things, and sometimes we forget that the work of the Lord is work that is never done in vain. And this scripture reminds me too that as I start this blank journal and it can be so daunting to think I'm going to do this whole journal. As I start this, I can know this is the work of the Lord to help me to learn scripture, to learn the Lord closely, to have a better relationship with Christ, and I want to be steadfast. So in this scripture, I want to underline these words, which mean so much to me. Steadfast, immovable, always abounding. I want to underline those, and then I want to underline the work of the Lord. Now in my experience section, I want to write out for myself how I want to experience this. So for me, I want to focus on those words. Let's start with steadfast. So in this section, I've written out how I want to experience this scripture this week. I want to be steadfast. I want to be ready. Go, do for God, and don't quit. I want to be immovable. Don't let Satan get in your way. Fight him off. I'm talking to myself, telling myself what to do. Always, not just today, not only in good times, every day, work for God. And then God's business, which is the work of the Lord, be about it. Now, you may want to talk to yourself in a different way. You may want to give yourself a list of things to actually accomplish this week about your scripture. However you want to experience the scripture in your life, I want it to be more than just memorizing a scripture, although it is memorization. I want you to also strive to experience the scripture. Now, you can, and like I said, it may not be one scripture. We may do multiples at a time, depending on, what passage we're working on. But let that passage or that scripture sink in. There's nothing wrong with spending a week focusing on the work of the Lord and how to be steadfast and immovable and always abounding in the work of the Lord. So this gets me started, and now I can start to art journal it. Now you may find for yourself that it's easier to art journal later, but I'm going to go ahead and art journal now because I have an idea of what I want to do. Now, much like I did in my journal in 2015, I'm going to build my pages separate from the book and not actually build them in the book in case I make a mistake. I'll build the page here and then I'll glue this into the book. I think that worked really well for me last year. There's a couple things I want to do. I want to focus on a mountain and a rock and things like that to show me to be steadfast and immovable. And I'm going to turn these into that, or we're going to try to anyway. The first thing I want to do is ink this page heavily. Just using my little scrap notebook here, and I'm going to ink the edges of this page because I want it to look almost like the sky, but in a darker color. Notice I'm not using like sky colors. I'm going to try to do this in sandy tones. Notice how I'm leaving the center very clear. I'm going to focus on that being clear because that's going to be like where the light is coming from. And now for these sheets, I want to turn this craft color into some rocks, but I'm going to do some paper tearing because that's how I want this to be, like mountains coming down. So I'm just going to tear at this, something like that, and see where we end up. So there's a part of it, and then I want to have another piece coming out. Let me see if this piece might do it. Yeah, I think that will. I can glue it underneath and get that look. Or do I want it to go like this? So this is where you just play around and see what you like here, because I want this to look like a mountain or a rocky cliff. Just like this. That looks good. And then I'm going to ink these so you can see them really well. So I'm going to glue it down and then trim it off after I finish. But first, I'm going to ink this up really heavy too with this same ink. And this is what is going to give it that more rocky cliff looking feel. And with this paper being slightly darker, it will, you know, be a good contrast. So here's where we are so far. I'm going to put these pieces down. And I'm going to start by placing this one and then finding out where I want this second mountainside to go. Something like that. So I'm going to glue that in that spot. And don't worry about what's hanging over because we're going to trim that off and touch it with the ink again. And get the edges all nice and inked as well. So now I'm going to take this ink tool and ink up those edges as well there. Now the words that I chose from my scripture I want to put in this area. And those words were steadfast, and also the word immovable. And then I want to focus on the word always. And then dots, because I like those because it kind of carries me out. And now you can do anything else you want. You can do some word art, you can underline things, you can do anything you like here. So I'm just going to play around and add some things. So I wrote some words across the hilltop here. Let nothing move you. Stand firm. Be strong always, just as a reminder. And I'm going to do some little arrows in this area just to give a little extra aesthetic. Like so. Be steadfast. And then I want to be immovable. So here you can see I just added an arrow for steadfast to be always going. Immovable, this little design here reminds me of like mountain peaks, and then always is the up and down of life is what that represents for me. So I think this is really neat and a good way to focus on what I want to really put into practice this week. So now let's put that in our journal. And it'll go in just like this. I love these colors. That's interesting that I'm into these colors for the first of the year. You'd think it'd be brighter, I guess, but I'm liking these neutral colors. So there is week 1, literally in the book. So I have my hearing, my experience, and my art, which makes up heart, which I think is super cool because that's what we're focusing on this year, is heart of Scripture. So there you go, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. Be sure to check the link below for the How to Get Started video so you'll know exactly what we're doing this year and you can be a part of that. If you've never seen my scripture art journaling before, please head over to Hide His Word in My Heart. It's our Facebook group. There'll be links for that below too. You can get a lot of information there to get you started. All right, guys. Happy 2016. Happy New Year. I look forward to this journey again with you this year. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.